Hello and welcome to Indus News. Live from Islamabad, I'm Naila Shuja and these are the headlines. The Taliban claim they have seized the key Chaman-Spin-Boldak border crossing with Pakistan. Spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid says they have taken over the important border town of Vesh in Kandahar province, but the Afghan government says it has repelled the fighters from the critical transit point. Indian forces have martyred 3 more civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youths were targeted during an operation in the Pulwama district. The forces have also suspended internet services in the area. In South Africa, the death toll in the unrest following the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma has risen to 72. Police clashed with the charged crowds who ransacked or set ablaze shopping malls across the nation. Authorities say over 1,200 people have been arrested in the last few days. Brazil has reported more than 1,600 daily deaths from COVID-19 and over 45,000 cases. In Australia, the lockdown in Sydney has been extended by at least 14 days. Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported 24 more deaths and nearly 2,000 cases overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4 million lives and infected over 187 million people. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back. The Taliban claim they have seized the key Chaman-Spin-Boldak border crossing with Pakistan. Spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid says they have taken over the border town of Vesh in Kandahar province. However, the Afghan government says it has repelled the fighters from the border crossing. Meanwhile, Britain says it will work with the Taliban should they come to power in Afghanistan. In an interview, Defense Minister Ben Wallace said the UK will, however, review any relationship if the group violates human rights. Earlier, China urged the Taliban to make a clean break with all terrorist forces and return to mainstream Afghan politics. For more on this, we are joined by defense analyst Brigadier Imran Malik, speaking to us from Lahore. Thank you so much for speaking to Indus News. Now, Brigadier, after this recent statement from London, do you believe the West is slowly making peace with the possibility of a Taliban-led future government in Afghanistan?
Thank you very much for having me on your program. I think, yes, as we've probably discussed earlier as well, the writing is on the wall now. Whether we have a peace process bringing in an Afghan national government, or whether the Taliban make a run for Kabul and take over the city and the country, I think it is a fact now that the Taliban will either form the government by themselves, and even if it is a coalition government, they will have the most dominant part or the most major part of that government. So the world is slowly, gradually coming to the realization that they will have to deal with the Taliban one way or the other once they take over Kabul. And I think the Britishers are perhaps the first ones to have acknowledged this, and even President Joe Biden in his press conference had indicated that he would not be too averse, let's say, to dealing with the Taliban.
Brigadier Imran, now over the past 2 weeks, the Taliban appear to be keener to capture border towns, especially the ones that serve as trade and transit conduits. What could be the objective behind this strategy?
I think that's a great observation, because there is a clear-cut strategic pattern in the way the Taliban are increasing or expanding their control over the country. We see that they've taken over the major trade and border crossings in the north with Tajikistan, in the west with Turkmenistan, in the southwest with Iran. And now they've come and taken over Spin Boldak. I mean, although news reports say that the fighting is still continuing there, but they seem to have attained a control and operating control over the road leading from Chaman to Spin Boldak and on to Kandahar. Simultaneously, they are also attacking and establishing control over the central districts. And clearly, Kabul is also coming under pressure. So there might be a sense of isolation that might be dawning on to the people in Kabul, that all the major crossings with their immediate neighbors have been taken over by the Taliban, and the central districts too are under great pressure. So I think the Taliban are moving in with a proper military strategy sort of a thing, and and their juggernaut seems to be unstoppable at the moment.
All right, now, Brigadier Imran, there are reports of a possible transitional government being considered in the recently reinvented Doha talks. President Ghani reached out to his political opponent, Hamid Karzai, amid the heavy losses to the Afghan forces a couple of days ago, who is now leading a delegation of opposition politicians in Doha. Is there a possibility of a transitional government being agreed upon? And more importantly, would that be the right thing to do?
I think perhaps that is the best option for Afghanistan as a whole, as a country and as a nation. Because a transitional government through a peace process probably would meet the requirements of not only the one government, but the neighboring countries as well as the international community. However, as I said earlier, it will be quite difficult for the Taliban to just compromise with people they've been fighting for the last 20 years. And as I said earlier, whatever way the next government is formed, the Taliban will have to be the most dominant part of it. Otherwise, their entire efforts will be fruitless and they'll all go in vain. So I personally think that the Taliban, whatever talks or parleys they have wherever, Doha or anywhere else, they will probably dictate their terms. They will take over the country, they will form the government, and they will also get people from other representatives from other ethnicities and other sectarian groups and other linguistic groups as well, other regions as well, to form a coalition government. At least the face they put up in front of the international community will be one of a whole of a nation government, a government representing the entire Afghanistan and all its people. So I think whatever talks that take place will eventually bring the Taliban into power. And if they fail, they'll probably make a rush or a run for Kabul.
All right. Brigadier Imran Malik, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to Indus News. Now, moving on, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the region cannot afford another civil war as the security situation in Afghanistan worsens. He held meetings with his Kazakh and Uzbek counterparts on the sidelines of the SCO Council of Foreign Ministers in Dushanbe. Qureshi briefed Kazakh and Uzbek foreign ministers on Islamabad's efforts for peace in Afghanistan and its impact on Pakistan. He said a potential civil war may lead to instability and a fresh influx of refugees. The foreign minister is on a 3-day visit to Tajikistan. Indian forces have martyred 3 more civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youths were targeted during an operation in the Pulwama district. The forces have also suspended internet services in the area. The troops have carried out hundreds of extrajudicial murders during their so-called cordon and search operations. Rights group says Indian occupying forces have martyred at least 400 Kashmiris since August 2019. In South Africa, the death toll in the unrest following the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma has risen to 72. Police clashed with the charged crowds who ransacked or set ablaze shopping malls across the nation. Authorities say among the victims were 10 who died in a stampede in the township of Soweto. The police said that they have arrested over 1,200 people in the last few days. In a statement, the police said they have also identified 12 suspects of provoking riots. Soldiers have been deployed on the streets in Zuma's home province, KwaZulu-Natal, and in Gauteng. The African Union has condemned the deadly violence and called for urgent restoration of order. Another rocket attack has targeted the U.S. military base in Syria's Deir ez-Zor province. Syrian state media says this is the second such incident at the Al Omar oil field in 24 hours. However, it gave no reports on the casualties or the damages. The U.S. forces fighting in Syria and Iraq have not commented on the incident so far. Last week, the same field was targeted with drones. U.S. prosecutors have charged 4 Iranians with plotting to kidnap a New York journalist, critical of Tehran. They have been accused of being Iranian intelligence operatives. Prosecutors say the Iranian hired private investigators under false pretenses to surveil the journalist in Brooklyn. A U.S. attorney for New York said the defendants planned to forcefully take their intended victim to Iran. FBI's counterintelligence division says Tehran directed the operation as retaliation for freedom of expression. Meanwhile, the State Department says the United States is engaged in indirect but active talks to secure the release of U.S. detainees in Iran. Brazil has reported more than 1,600 daily deaths from COVID-19 and over 45,000 cases. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4 million lives and infected over 187 million people. More in this report. The European continent that emerged relatively victorious against COVID-19 at the start of this year has now been clutched by the Delta variant. In Portugal, authorities say all cases in Lisbon and Algarve regions are of the Delta variant. Spain's caseload has surpassed 4 million as the strain drives a surge of infections among the unvaccinated young people. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has warned that more people need to be vaccinated in the country before restrictions could be lifted. Meanwhile, French health workers are furious about President Emmanuel Macron's orders to get vaccinated or go home.
I don't understand why they want to force us to get vaccinated, knowing that we have rights in France. We are in a supposedly free country, liberty, equality, fraternity. So if that changes, I think they should also change the motto. You can say this is becoming a dictatorship because we are forced to do things that we do not want to do.
Italy has approved the temporary distribution of an antibody treatment by Britain's GlaxoSmithKline and U.S. company Vir Biotechnology. While in Greece, authorities said customers at indoor restaurants must furnish proof of vaccination. In Australia, Sydney's lockdown has been extended by at least 14 days after 3 weeks of initial curbs could not contain the outbreak.
And it always hurts to say this, but we need to extend the lockdown at least a further 2 weeks, from Friday the 16th of July to Friday the 30th of July. That includes home learning. However, we'll obviously assess the situation at the end of those 2 weeks and provide information beyond that. We are prioritising vaccinating aged care workers and teachers in those key local government areas.
South Korea has reported yet another record daily rise in COVID-19 cases with more than 1,600 testing positive. Bangladesh is set to lift its nationwide lockdown for religious festival Eid al-Adha even as new infections rise. Pakistan has reported 24 more deaths due to the coronavirus and nearly 2,000 new cases. The health ministry says the total has risen to 22,642. It said the country's positivity rate has once again surged to 4.17%. The ministry says out of nearly 41,000 active cases, more than 2,200 are critical. Pakistan has logged over 978,000 cases so far, while more than 915,000 people have recovered nationwide. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan will be paying an official 2-day visit to the Republic of Uzbekistan from the 15th of July. The Foreign Ministry says he has been invited by Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev. The Prime Minister will be accompanied by high-level delegation, including the Foreign Minister. The office says international issues and bilateral relations, especially trade, will be on the agenda. A number of agreements are expected to be signed aimed at deepening bilateral cooperation in diverse areas. The Prime Minister will address the first Pakistan-Uzbekistan Business Forum. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The United Nations has called for the accountability of those behind enforced disappearances in Syria in the past decade. The Human Rights Council adopted a resolution with 26 in favor, 6 against, and 15 absentations. The resolution was presented by several European countries, the United States, Turkey, and Qatar. It decided that Syria's crisis has entered a second decade marked by gross violations. The text condemned what it called consistent human rights violations and abuses by the Syrian regime. It also criticized other parties to the conflict but said the Syrian government is the main perpetrator. The war in Syria has killed nearly 500,000 people since it started in 2011, with all sides accused of war crimes. In Nepal, veteran politician Sher Bahadur Deuba has been appointed as the prime minister for the 5th time. This comes a day after the Supreme Court reinstated the parliament dissolved by caretaker Premier KP Sharma Oli in May. The 74-year-old leader has to win a vote of confidence in the lower house within a month to retain the post. He was previously appointed prime minister in 1995, 2001, 2004, and 2017, but has never served a full term. This time as well, Deuba is to serve only until the parliamentary elections in 2022. In China, the death toll in a partial collapse of a hotel in Jiangsu's Suho City has risen to 17. Authorities say they have ended the search and rescue mission. The local government said 23 people had been pulled from the rubble and just 6 survived. It said preliminary investigations found the collapse was triggered by an unauthorized renovation. More than 600 personnel, including earthquake rescue teams, and 120 vehicles were mobilized for the operation. In the Emmy Awards, TV series The Crown and The Mandalorian are leading the nominations. HBO and HBO Max led all networks with 130 nominations, followed by Netflix with 129. The British royal series The Crown and Disney Plus Star Wars spin-off drama The Mandalorian both got 24 nominations. Apple TV Plus comedy Ted Lasso scored 20 nods. Best Drama Series contenders also included Bridgerton and Pause. The Emmy Awards will be handed out at the ceremony in Los Angeles on the 19th of September. Britain's Royal Shakespeare Company has opened an outdoor theater with a new version of the Comedy of Errors. This is the first of such full-scale production in front of a live audience in over a year. More in this report. Based in playwright William Shakespeare's birthplace of Stratford-upon-Avon, the RSC built the Lydia and Manfred Grovey Garden Theatre outside its Swan Theatre by the River Avon. The Comedy of Errors had been due to begin performances in April 2020, but the RSC had to close its doors to live audiences due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The production has been now adapted by director Philip Breen for a new temporary open-air venue.
Go back again and bring you beaten home! For God's sake, send some other messenger! Back! You know, it's a beautiful spot here in Stratford. We're right by the river right here now, and so we get some heckling from some swans occasionally, all that kind of stuff. But I guess this is what happened 400 years ago. You know, there weren't too many roofs around and stuff like that in the theatre then. Now, one of my favourite things about doing this kind of stuff is that it feels sort of timeless, really.
The RSC's Garden Theatre can seat 500 people or 310 with social distancing.
I felt there are two really powerful reasons to build this theatre, one of which was as a sort of symbol, a symbol of regeneration and of opening up, but also as a transition, so that people will feel very comfortable sitting outside in the open air.
In London's West End, major productions including hit musicals such as Jersey Boys and The Lion King have been waiting for July 19th to be able to fully reopen, as operating at 50% capacity is not financially viable. Most shares in the Asia-Pacific have fallen following a hotter-than-expected U.S. inflation report released overnight. Stocks in mainland China and Hong Kong have dipped close to 1%. Seoul's Kospi and Japan's Nikkei 225 have also slipped nearly 0.25%. However, the ASX 200 in Australia has gained more than 0.25%. It's now time to take a look at the weather updates from around the world. For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at indus.news.